So, Renato, how far can the Trump administration go to punish lawmakers who speak out against them?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rengappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm the author of the Freedom Academy Substack.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet. So, Asha, what an insane action by the Secretary of supposedly War, Pete Hegseth, and I know, so dumb, in the Trump administration.
Yeah, it just got dumber, guys. So I guess we've all seen this commercial, ad commercial, I think, video that these lawmakers made. They're lawmakers who are veterans, former service members, basically speaking to active duty service members and telling them that they do not have to follow illegal orders.
That's right. That's right. You can. Our view is our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders was the key statement. And by the way, that's accurate.
That is a true statement. And but this made Trump really mad.
Yes. I mean, he went off, like, he used the term, and I thought it was ironic, sedition. And he kept calling it. And of course, I think one of the more infamous episodes in our history are the Alien and Sedition Acts early in our nation's history. I mean, our nation actually has very broad protection for free speech.
Yeah. So the Alien Sedition Act, there was a whole suite of acts that some of which punished speech. Those are no longer in effect, but we talked about before the Alien Enemies Act, and that's kind of comes out of those. But that's not what he's talking about. The only sedition act that we now have on the books is seditious conspiracy, which you might remember from the post January 6th era. And I'm just going to quickly read out what seditious conspiracy is, if that's okay.
Sure.
If two or more persons in any state or territory, or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law in the United States, or by force to do a lot more other things. You're kind of getting the picture here, Renato. I think
it describes January 6th
element here that is that involves sedition, which is by force, but also that it's sedition when you're actually going against the laws of the United States or trying to subvert the laws of the United States, not when you're articulating the laws of the United States.
Well, that's right. And by the way, this is a law that is, and this principle that you don't have to follow illegal orders is actually something that is celebrated with good reason, because there have been many times in history where illegal orders have been issued, not just in this country, but elsewhere, or rather famously, I think we lionize people who understand that, when the My Lai massacre is happening, putting your helicopter in between the people trying to massacre civilians and the civilians is actually bravery. It's not an act of sedition.
It's quite the opposite. When you don't follow illegal orders, you are actually upholding your oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. And I will say I think they're speaking to officers. I mean, I think they're speaking to everyone, right? But it is interesting that the oath of office actually differs for enlisted people versus military officers. Enlisted service members take an oath to obey orders, which, I mean, still they can only obey legal orders. But after the Civil War, the oath for military officers was changed to explicitly state that their loyalty was to the Constitution. And so I think that this is, I mean, it's speaking to all of them, but I think it's reminding them with their respective oaths that for enlisted service members, to follow orders means legal orders, and to officers that, their loyalty is to the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about sort of Trump viewing himself as the United States government and himself as really a dictator, ruler, authoritarian rather than the Constitution of the United States. And to me, this reminds me of the conversation you and I had with General Hertling
Mm-hmm.
when Hegseth made that speech to all these military personnel. And by the way, I think the attempts to weed out supposedly disloyal members of the kind of highest ranking officers in the United States military. And really, this is about Trump saying loyalty to me, loyalty to my principles, loyalty to who I am and my agenda is what the military.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you're swearing to. There's I think we talked about this before in a prior episode about social identity theory and why it's so powerful. And so social identity theory is that basically we all have various identities, right? So Renato, you're a former federal prosecutor. You're a husband. You're a Chicagoan. And so depending on which of those identities is the most salient for you at any given context, you're going to approach a situation or absorb a context or information in a certain way. And what I thought was really interesting about that video is that what I think it's trying to do is essentially trigger that that collective identity as a member of the military. Kind of reminding them that this is our community, like this is who we are, and this is what we have. This is what our profession and what we are. What our duty is. And I think that is exactly why it was so threatening. Like, I think if you just had a video of a bunch of random people who were not necessarily themselves veterans or former service members, I don't think it would have been as threatening to Trump. I think it was specifically that it was powerful because it's getting to their identity and forging that common bond, invoking that common bond and giving them this reminder.
Yeah, it's a really smart insight, Asha. I think that it's evoking too the concept of an apolitical military, and that and sort of resurrecting and not resurrecting because I don't think it's dead, but sort of trying to carry forward the traditions of our military that have been in place for decades, where the military has stayed out of political matters. And as we've discussed many times, I mean, Trump is trying to do the opposite, whether it's these speeches by Hegseth or these clearing out of supposedly disloyal generals and admirals and so on, or the use of the military against our civilian population and really a policing action, which we've talked about at length as well. That's the National Guard, but it's similar, right? It's the idea that the military he views as, whether it's a parade or something else, this is a celebration of himself. It's something at his personal command versus an army that is responsible to the people of the United States, the government of the United States, and more importantly, the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah. And let's be clear here. This is not happening in some kind of vacuum, and everything you just said is right, but it's not that they're saying don't obey orders from Trump. I mean, we are in a situation, and we have discussed this on this podcast in a prior week, where illegal orders appear to be given in ordering these military strikes in the Caribbean. I have yet to hear any former JAG, any national security lawyer, any lawyer really, say that these appear to be legal on their face in any way whatsoever. And the administration itself has also failed to provide its internal legal justification for what it's doing. So it seems like these are illegal orders because these are orders for strikes on what appear to be non-military targets and could potentially even be civilians. And so, it's not it's not even about Trump. I think that it is really focusing on a context where there are actual illegal orders, the substance of those orders that are being given right now.
Yeah, and these are orders that really matter, Asha. I mean, it's worth noting Rand Paul has been a Republican who has raised serious questions about this and has challenged the legality of these orders, to his credit, just standing on principle there. And of course, we've seen this week, he's drawn the ire of Trump. Trump is targeting him, and Trump is sending a lot of American military power in the region of Venezuela, including a carrier battle group there. And really, I think there's concerns that Trump is going to be taking military action not authorized by Congress in furtherance of this goal of fighting drug dealing, which is a crime, and narcotics trafficking, using military force without any sort of due process whatsoever.
Yes. So these people are pushing back. And I just want to point out here, because we're going to talk about congressional immunity in just a second, that when the Supreme Court issued its opinion on absolute immunity for the president, when he is engaging in quote unquote official acts. And by the way, giving an illegal order is, under the Supreme Court's rubric, an official act. In fact, this was one of the hypotheticals that was presented, by the appellate court, but then I think it came up also later, is the SEAL Team 6. Like, what if the president orders the military to order SEAL Team 6 to go murder his political opponents? And what the government itself said, by the way, in response to what the check is, like what would stop, if there's no criminal liability, what then constrains the president? And the government's lawyers said what constrains the president is that the people under him will not follow an illegal order.
Yeah, and I will note, I think that was Trump's lawyer, not the government, but the point stands, which is that this is essentially
he wasn't in the government yet. Yes.
Right. Well, yeah, not back yet. But the point being is the same. Okay. And one thing I will just say is, it's worth noting that, some of the lawyers who argued, some of Trump's cases are in government, some are not, but like Trump, really is looking, is very much looking for people who are going to give him, and looking for advocacy of policies that give him this sort of unfettered authority. And, candidly, I have to say I was a little bit surprised. You mentioned we were going to talk about immunity. When you stack up the immunity you just talked about to the immunity that Congress has, it's really remarkable, Asha, because Congress has written words in the Constitution about immunity, something called the speech and debate clause. There's a thing about presidential immunity in the Constitution.
Right.
But yet, when I looked at the Supreme Court cases, as it turns out, having a senator make a statement or a speech about an issue of public concern outside of the context of the Senate floor, or, having operations within the Senate itself, that is not covered by the speech and debate clause.
Well, let's put a button on that for a second and come back, because let's just give the context here. So after having a temper tantrum about this video, there's been a number of things that have happened. It looks like the FBI has initiated investigations against these lawmakers. We can talk about that. There has also been a threat from Secretary Hegseth to court-martial Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly. And so one of the things that has come up is whether they have immunity from any kind of prosecution in these contexts. Look, can we just pause for a second? There's no crime here. Okay. So this is all.
To that too.
Okay. So we'll get to that too. But the reason that we're talking about congressional immunity is whether there is this, essentially shield that just from the get-go would bar them. And Renato, what you're talking about is the speech or debate clause, which is essentially congressional immunity, which is, as you mentioned, actually written into the Constitution. And the executive immunity is not. I mean, this is something that has been essentially hocus pocused into life by the court. But as you noted, it is striking because, like you, I was doing research for this episode thinking that, yes, speech or debate would, it won't let them get anywhere, but it's actually fairly narrow. It's fairly narrow. It only applies to, I have it actually written down because it's kind of law. It's whether the conduct constitutes an integral part of the deliberative and communicative processes by which members participate in committee and House proceedings with respect to consideration and passage or rejection of proposed legislation or matters that Constitution places within their jurisdiction. I mean, that's like in other words, only with regard to legislation that they're working on or might be passing or something like that, or some kind of core constitutional function.
Yeah, and even there, it might be only be in certain contexts. In other words, going around the country giving speeches about an act that you would like to get passed probably doesn't do it. And that I thought was very interesting, Asha, because I think we've seen over the years, you and I have talked about actually at times, speech and debate clause. Remember, there's an insider trading allegation against a particular senator and so on. But the point being is that when those contexts, there was a lot of discussion, is there a way to loop it in? And courts have been pretty careful about circumscribing it. Not so careful in the presidential immunity context.
Well, except in a couple of contexts where it has actually helped shield certain conduct that helped Trump. So there was one case where the toll records of a member of Congress following January 6th were collected, and the investigators had to screen out anything that might have related to their calls pertaining to whether or not to certify the election.
Right. Well,
that was the conspiracy. And then Lindsey Graham, when he called Georgia on behalf of Trump to find those votes, and then he was subpoenaed to testify, part of those conversations that pertain to whether he was going to vote, I don't know, it was something related to voting to certifying the election, or after that, maybe making, investigating voter fraud or something like that, was protected. So you see how, that narrow immunity has been invoked to actually still help Trump.
Which is crazy. And what's crazier, you mentioned the FBI initiating an investigation, Asha. Generally speaking, talking about issues of public concern is not a crime. It can't be criminalized. It's actually protected by the First Amendment. And so really, what we're talking about here is something very bizarre, to put it mildly, particularly, and really kind of relates to the military, aspect of this.
Well, and I'll add one more thing about the FBI. So the FBI is governed by something called the Attorney General Guidelines. People who've been listening for a while might remember me talking about this in other contexts. The Attorney General Guidelines, which are promulgated by the Justice Department. So it's not a law, but it's an internal Justice Department, set of rules, governs how investigations can be conducted. And one of the main rules in there, these all came out of the church hearings in the 1970s, and this is all about, ensuring that people's civil liberties are protected. But a core rule within the Attorney General Guidelines is that you cannot investigate somebody based solely on First Amendment activity. Mm-hmm. And, unless it is itself a predication for something else, an actual crime. So you had mentioned insider trading. So technically insider trading could involve speech, but that could be, it's speech that does itself constitute a crime. There is simply no way that these statements constitute predication for any crime at all whatsoever. And so what this tells me is, right now, the Justice Department and the FBI are not working under the Attorney General Guidelines. And that should concern everybody, because that means that it's just a no holds barred. They're just opening investigations on people based on whatever they feel like.
Well, it really ties into some of the conversations we've been having about other perceived adversaries of Trump and his administration, whether it's Letitia James or Adam Schiff or James Comey and others. I mean, the bottom line is if you're seen as someone who is adversarial or an enemy of Trump in some way, there's an effort to try to gin up a crime. And very questionable circumstances in those other cases. Although you note, and I think it's accurate, Asha, that at least there they can sort of wave their hands and say there's some crime there. It's really hard to see what the crime is here. And that's why I said the military angle, because they're trying to like talk about sort of essentially this is a court martial proceeding, something along those lines.
Yeah, so the threat that's been made against Senator Mark Kelly is that they are going to court martial him. Now, I did a little bit of digging on this. I think the reason that they're focusing on Mark Kelly is I think so by statute, the UCMJ does allow for retired members of the armed forces to be court-martialed if they've committed a crime. By the way, including for conduct after they leave service. So he does fall under the jurisdiction of the UCMJ. Part of what I had been looking into is that, and I think the reason that maybe the other service members are not, kind of being named specifically is that although they are separated from the military, they aren't retired, like they're not receiving a pension. And so I think in order to court-martial them, I don't even know, I think they'd have to be recalled into active duty, and you can't do that when someone is sitting in Congress because there is a constitutional prohibition against members of Congress like holding other federal offices. So I think there could be some barrier there. I don't even know if they're still under the jurisdiction, but they've been talking about Mark Kelly, court-martialing him. Though I did speak with our former guest, General Mark Hertling, and he said that he had worked on as a part of the court-martial system, and he said that there's an investigation and inquiry that would have to take place before someone is court-martialed, and he said that there's just not, as you said, there's no crime here, so there's nowhere for the inquiry itself to go. So I think this is a lot of threats that are being put out, but it's also a threat that's intended to send a message to other people, other retirees. I mean, there's 2 million retired service members in the country that maybe they shouldn't speak up either because they might face some consequences.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one thing I will say that has been notable though, Asha, in this context, because this is an abuse of power. I think that's the way I would describe this. It's an abuse of power. And I've noticed that some Republicans are speaking out about this. And the word that I've seen used is performative. And they're basically saying, there's been some prominent Republicans who've spoken out, basically saying, this is the administration doing more performative stuff that doesn't actually do anything. It's not going to mean anything. They're kind of agreeing with our analysis of this legally. And by performative, I think they mean it's just all for show to sort of placate people in their base. And it's then they're going to move on to the next thing. And I found that remarkable, including also, by the way, I will say some sitting senators like Lisa Murkowski speaking out about this in a more serious way as well.
And I think they have an interest because there's also a separation of powers issue, Renato. I think people should know that even though the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the Congress has a lot of powers and authority over the armed forces as well. And one of them, Article 1, Section 8, gives Congress the power to make rules and regulations for the armed forces. The UCMJ is a statute that is passed by Congress. And the prohibition against following illegal orders is codified. This is this is literally their job to establish these rules. And so when you have the president, when you have the executive branch trying to punish members of Congress for essentially articulating legislation that they've passed pursuant to their explicit constitutional authorities. I mean, then, that could go to anything, really.
Sure.
If you have a member of Congress who states, whatever the law is on, you can't murder people, you can't do whatever, is that then going to be punishable because it's something that, the executive branch is trying to do and they don't want you to remind people that you can't? I mean, that I think there is a larger structural problem here with the executive branch trying to go after these Congress members for this type of thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think there's almost like two separate sort of lanes here of criticism. Like one, the Lisa Murkowskis of the world are thinking like, geez, could I be next? Right? Ron Paul, as I mentioned, or not Ron Paul, excuse me, Rand Paul.
Rand Paul.
Sorry, a moment ago, his father also spoke out against against this, but Rand Paul basically, criticizing and questioning the legality of these strikes, which is something I think should be applauded. They're thinking to themselves, okay, basically, if I get cross with the administration, in addition to getting primaried, like you have Marjorie Taylor Greene basically resigning to avoid a very difficult and, painful process of our primary, but they actually might try to arrest you, might try to totally upend your life and destroy your life. But also, there's becoming, I'd say, a trend here with this administration of saying things that have no basis in reality. And I find it interesting that some of the right are catching on to that as well, because we've been seeing it a lot when we've been talking about these events. Like, they're never going to be able to do this. Like we talked about, and we'll talk later today about the Comey prosecution and others. The whole point of it is to make a show, not actually to do something serious.
Yeah. And I think that it gets to a theme that we've seen before, going back to the perfect phone call to Zelensky, wanting him to announce an investigation to the Bidens. It's all to create the cloud of suspicion, to be able to say people are being investigated, to put them through the harassment. And I think it's part of his revenge, right? Because he was investigated. And so now everybody's going to get investigated.
Yeah.
That crosses his path.
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you, this is one of the most serious overreaches by Trump. I think it's something we should be concerned about because, if he starts coming after members of Congress and senators and trying to use our military, I mean, it kind of has two different angles, using our military in an illegal fashion, trying to get them to obey unlawful orders. I think we're going to end up in a really bad place.
Well, one way they could actually pull a Trump card here, if you will.
Pun intended?
Unintended, is that they can actually make these, exhort service members to not follow illegal orders, but do it on the House floor. Somebody on Blue Sky reminded me that a member of Congress read the Pentagon papers into the congressional record. And that is not something, I think those were ostensibly classified or whatever, but too bad, so sad, because that would then fall squarely within the speech and debate clause. And it would, it would be kind of like an FU.
Yeah. Well, and to draw another parallel, Thomas Massie, the congressman, has threatened to do that with the Epstein files. Like, if you don't release the list of Epstein's co-conspirators, co-criminals, I'm going to read it on the House floor, which is sort of his nuclear option.
Yeah, and that's protected. So hopefully they're getting a backbone.
So, Asha, if it really says something that this isn't our biggest story of the week, but as we predicted,
Comey choose your own adventure.
Yes, and the adventure is James Comey looks like not going to be facing criminal trial after all.
For now.
For now.
So remember, the choose your own adventure was 3 different paths. And so yesterday, we flipped to page 52, which was when Halligan's appointment is ruled invalid. And this is something that we had talked about several weeks ago. But this is a motion that James Comey made and Letitia James had made, that Lindsay Halligan, who had been appointed as an interim U.S. attorney by Attorney General Pam Bondi, that appointment was invalid under a statute, 28 U.S.C. Section 546. And we went over it in a previous pod, but basically the thrust of it is that under the statute, the Attorney General can name someone as an interim U.S. attorney for a period of up to 120 days. And when that 120 days expires, if the president hasn't at that point, filled that spot with a Senate confirmed person, the judges of that district get to name a replacement for another 100. Well, I don't know if there's a time there for another 120 days, right? And then the question is, in this case, the person that the district court had named, Eric Siebert, had resigned because he didn't think that the cases that he was being asked were had any basis, and then Trump claimed that he fired him or whatever. And the question is, after that, did Bondi, did the authority revert to her to then be able to pick somebody else, or is the only power to put a replacement if there's nobody that's been Senate confirmed yet still in the court's hands? And this motion, basically, the court said no, only the court could replace Eric Siebert, who resigned, and therefore Halligan's appointment by Pam Bondi was not valid. So basically what this means is she was basically a legal nobody. It would be like some rando coming in off the street presenting indictments in grand juries. Like she had no vested authority of the United States to be able to present on behalf of the United States these charging documents.
Right. And, I think the key point regarding this, if you're trying to get your head around, if you're listening to this, trying to get your head around this appointment
I didn't explain it too well.
Well, no, I think you did. It's very complicated. That's the name of the show here, is that really the clock didn't restart when Bondi appointed Halligan. That was the court's ruling, was essentially the clock did not start over again. Siebert's appointment was what started the clock, and you had your 120 days then. But, just to make a point that I think is interesting here, you mentioned she's like somebody off the street. Well, you don't need to be, technically speaking, under the Constitution and laws of the United States, the presidentially appointed U.S. attorney to seek and approve indictments. Now, there are internal Justice Department rules about how that might work, or maybe an office has rules. But the bottom line is, if she's just been hired to be a federal prosecutor, she would have been fine. And essentially, the attorney general tried to fix that later, recognizing the issue by appointing Halligan to be a special attorney, but it was too late.
By retroactively appointing her to be a special U.S. attorney. As the court said, she tried to reach back in time. Like, it's like October, and it's becoming, the writing is on the wall that, they screwed up and that her appointment is invalid. And remember that the reason that this is a problem, everyone listening, is that Halligan was the only one who presented this case and who signed it. If there had been literally any other prosecutor with her or who had signed it, and that the invalidation of her appointment would not be fatal. But it's just that this whole thing rested on her authority alone. And what Bondi tries to do in like October, when it's like looking bad, is the court says she tried to reach back in time and correct this error. And he's like, she can't do that.
Right. And it's an interesting, by the way, another kind of interesting point there is that the actions of individual prosecutors mattered here, because really what happened was prosecutors did not want to have a piece of this case. They did not want their name on it. And, a lot of times you'll see in the news, so-and-so resign rather than do this, or, this and that. Here, it actually mattered that a lot of just average Joe and Jane prosecutors decided they didn't want to have a piece of this case and didn't want to have a part of it. And that really actually mattered here in this.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that I see this a lot of people that are like, nothing matters anymore. even if somebody resigns or they decide not to do it, he'll just find somebody who does. But, it can, depending on how it's done, that can still have consequences. One thing, though, that is interesting is that the judge dismissed the case without prejudice.
That's right. Now, just explain what that means. Typically, when you have something dismissed without prejudice, that means the government can bring it back. Now, this discussion we've had about Lindsay Halligan relates really to two specific indictments, James Comey and Letitia James. And I'll just say, so the Letitia James indictment, I view this as just a delay, right? I mean, they're going to come back with the Letitia James indictment because there's no statute of limitations issue. Statute of limitations is essentially a limit in the amount of time that you have to prosecute somebody. But as of today, of course, the James Comey statute of limitations is expired, which in an ordinary circumstance, you'd be like, well, we had our shot. We screwed it up. We're not going to, that's it. We're done with this one. Unless the person's a truly heinous criminal. But here, the Justice Department, Trump's Justice Department, is going to be pushing forward with the prosecution of James Comey, trying to find a way, not only an appeal to reverse the decision, but potentially to try to find other ways to plow forward, despite the fact that the prosecution itself is highly suspect.
Yeah, the court decision says that basically this ruling places Comey back into the position he was in before this indictment is charged. But I guess I think the question is that there is a statute that when an indictment is invalid, like the government gets, and it's dismissed without prejudice, that there's like some grace period actually given to the government to refile.
Right, a 6-month grace period. The problem that they have is, I would say, twofold. So one would be if you refile it. So first of all, they may win the appeal. They're doing that first, right? So that would, if the judge is wrong, then her ruling does not matter. But then secondly, the question is, if you reaffirm an indictment that was obtained illegally, what does that do? I don't think it's ever happened before, okay, in this way, in this specific circumstance. So I think the judge would need to decide that issue. By the way, even if they do that, let's say they win an appeal or they get reaffirmed and they are able to do that, there are other adventures left. I mean, all the other paths that you alluded to, Asha, in the choose your own adventure are still open.
Yeah, they're still alive.
Yeah. So I think this is being set up for Comey, like never actually getting to a trial, because you're going to have all these court proceedings that drag on forever challenging this. And it's essentially going to be like, how many times is the football going to have to be removed by Lucy before Charlie Brown's just like, I'm done.
Yeah. You know what my favorite part was about this judge's order?
What?
When the judge cites Eileen Cannon to say that, the invalid appointment kind of invalidates
the whole thing.
The whole thing. Because that was the ground that Eileen Cannon used in the Mar-a-Lago case. She basically said that the special counsel was not validly appointed. That decision, she was basically copying a dissent that was written by Justice Thomas in another case. And that never got resolved because then eventually, Trump became president again and the Justice Department dismissed the indictment. But it was a little hilarious.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, you could tell the Judge Curry was very skeptical, I would say, put it kindly, this entire matter. I mean, it kind of dripped from the page. Yeah. And that's why I feel
the first sentence where where the judge says, Lindsay Halligan, an insurance lawyer with no prosecutorial experience, appeared in court. I just thought it was interesting that they needed to drop that detail.
Yeah, no question. And I just think the judge gets sort of what's going on here. And, it's interesting because I had said in a prior episode, I thought the cleanest way to get rid of this was on her instructions, which are clearly wrong. And
Yeah.
I don't know how they get away with that. But this is really a step one. Like if to get there, you need to get past this hurdle first, right? Was there a valid indictment? So I wouldn't be surprised if, like I said, even if this ends up back in square one and Comey's technically facing prosecution, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in another frolic and another long, appellate process after this.
Stay tuned.
So Asha, before we go, I don't know about you, I'm really looking forward to Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I love Thanksgiving. I think it's one of my favorite holidays. I also don't typically travel over Thanksgiving. So for me, it's like kind of chill. It's cozy. I have plans with family or friends. That's all local. So it's easy.
I feel the same way. We always do local. Usually either my mom or my wife hosts it. This year, another relative of ours, an aunt of mine, is hosting it. But everyone gets together. We eat a lot of food. To me, it's a fun holiday because there's like not any stress to it. It's not all about running around and getting your last minute present or wrapping everything or decorating everything. It's just fun and family, right? That's what Thanksgiving is to me.
Yeah. I have so going to a friend's house for Thanksgiving. Friday night, I'm going to see an 80s cover band called Mullet.
What a great name for an 80s cover band. That's hilarious.
I did that last Thanksgiving weekend also. And then Saturday, my son has his Eagle Scout ceremony.
Whoa. And this is your son is already like at Princeton and like super achiever, right?
Yeah, he's done a lot. This did take him a long time though, because you have to do like a final project for Eagle, and it's very involved, which is why most people don't get to doing that. And it was like really down to the wire. So, he got everything finally squared away, like literally right before he left for college. And so now we're finally having a chance this weekend to do the ceremony to honor it.
Wow. Well, I'm proud of him. I'm not even a relative, but I am proud of him. And kudos to you as a mom. You've got to be very proud.
I am.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.